We can
All
get
right.
started.
Yeah, let's go.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I believe I know everyone on the call, but just in case, I'm Angelino Vicesa, Professor of Economics at Spelman and also co-director of the Retirement and Disability Research Center at the National Bureau of Economic Research. We are grateful to the Social Security Administration for supporting our center as well as this workshop. Before we jump in, just note that we are recording the session for those who cannot attend live and also those of you who may want to watch this back. And also we'll go for about 45 minutes and then take all the questions at the end. So please drop your questions and or comments in the chat and we'll collect them and provide them to Nicole. So without further ado, we are very happy to have Nicole Maestas running our session on Disability 101 today. Nicole is chair designate and Margaret T. Morris Professor of Healthcare Policy at Harvard University, and of course, my colleague as the director of the Retirement and Disability Research Center. So Nicole, we look forward to learning from you today, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to tell you a lot about the disability insurance program today, how it works, and we'll try to get into some of the open research questions, the economics of the program. I'm happy to be stopped for clarifying questions along the way. I might have a little trouble managing the chat, but you could also just, jump on in and ask a question if something wasn't clear. Okay, so let's see if I can get this to move. Okay, so people often use this term DI for disability insurance, and it's sort of a general term that often means both the SSDI program, which is Social Security Disability Insurance, and SSI, which is Supplemental Security Income. Okay. So when we're very specific about a particular program, we will use the acronym SSDI or SSI, and we'll use the term DI kind of more generically, or even to refer to DI programs in other countries. But what we're really talking about here are two flavors of program that are quite distinct in many ways. So SSDI is a social insurance program, whereas SSI is considered a, quote, welfare program, okay? And by welfare, we mean that kind of in the classic sense with the idea that there's some means testing for benefit eligibility. The two programs are administered hand in hand, both by the US Social Security Administration, but their financing arrangements are quite different. So we have the Social Security payroll tax financing the SSDI program. That tax, we all pay it. If we have jobs here in the US, 12.4%. It's split between workers and their employers. SSDI is getting, you'll know it by FICA on your pay stub. SSDI is getting 1.8 percentage points of that amount, okay? SSI, on the other hand, is financed by general fund tax revenues. So there's no dedicated financing stream for the SSI program the way there is for SSDI. The SSDI program is bigger than SSI, although both programs are large by any estimate. And I've got some program statistics here. I think the important thing to understand about these programs is not only do they provide a benefit, I'm going to tell you about the benefits in a moment, for disabled workers, but they also often provide a benefit for dependents. That could be spouses and children. We don't know much at all. I think that the spousal and children benefits associated with these programs are, in some ways, and particularly SSDI, are really understudied, and the value of those benefits are probably not well understood. And my guess is they're substantial. So SSDI runs at about $160 billion annually, compared to about $66 billion annually for SSI. The thing to remember about SSI, and this always needs to be kept straight in any research one does about the SSI program, is it's really three programs in one, okay? There's a program for the the non-elderly disabled adults, okay? So people under 65 who have a disability, but are very, very low income and low assets. There's a program for children, disabled children. There is also a program for the elderly, people over 65 who are very low income. Okay, some of them may be disabled, but disability is not a criteria for the program for elderly individuals. Okay, so 3-in-1 for SSI, whereas SSDI is a program primarily for disabled workers, people who have a work history and have experienced an episode of disability. Okay, the benefits are also quite a bit different across the programs. So SSDI has a what we call a progressive benefit formula based on average career earnings. And here's the important thing for those of you who heard Gopi's lecture a few weeks ago. It's the same as those Social Security retirement benefits. It's just you're getting them at whatever age you became disabled. Okay, so an average benefit is about $1,400 a month for the SSDI benefit. And whereas on the other hand, SSI is quite a bit different. It operates on a federal benefit rate, which is $943 per month. It's the same everywhere, but some states supplement, and then there are some offsets for different types of income. So in the data, you might see variation in the benefit amount people are getting. That's what's happening. It's all working off of the federal benefit rate, which gets updated annually. And then there are these additions and subtractions that occur. There's no sense in which one's earnings history comes into play for the SSI benefit, whereas the SSDI benefit is just like your retirement benefit. In fact, you just think of it as a retirement benefit without any penalties or reductions for early claiming. Right? So in the retirement program, if you claim at 62, you get less than if you wait till age 70. There's no, you get your full benefit with SSDI, even if you start receiving those benefits at age 30. Okay. Now, applicants can receive both SSDI and SSI at the same time. And in fact, they are all evaluated for both programs when someone applies. So it doesn't really matter. You don't have to, apply for one and then you won't be considered for the other. If it will just be checked if you might qualify for SSI. Okay, and that would be on the basis of having very low earnings and assets. We'll go over that in a moment. The health insurance benefits also differ across the program. Both programs give recipients entitlement to health insurance benefits, which is a very important aspect of the programs. But if SSDI gives Medicare, there's a waiting period for that, 29 months. And SSI gives Medicaid, okay? And there's no waiting period. The benefits begin the moment you're approved for SSI. In most states, this is an automatic qualification for Medicaid, although there are some states where it's not automatic and then there might need to be a separate application. Okay, so here are the eligibility rules. And again, I've got the same setup here, SSDI side by side with SSI. The first difference is that SSDI is just for adults ages 18 to 66, 66 being the full retirement age. So as the full retirement age is increasing, the upper age limit for SSDI also increases. So eventually it's going to be 67, okay? SSI, as we've already described, has a program for everybody, all ages. You've got disabled kids, you've got disabled adults, and then you have elderly individuals. It just depends on which program you're talking about. There are also work duration and recency requirements for SSDI that don't exist for SSI. Again, SSI is only about countable income. Here's the federal benefit rate for an individual and assets. And so in essence, people who have assets over $2,000 if they're an individual, or $3,000 if they're a couple, won't be eligible for SSI even if they have very low income. These asset and income limits have not been updated since the 80s. So they don't get, they don't increase with the CPI, for example. And there are policy efforts underway to try to update these, or at least put them on like a regular annual indexing, like other parameters of the program. So, if in the 1980s, this was a low threshold, but you can imagine how much, with the rise in incomes and prices and the economy, right? This is like an even stricter low threshold now. Yes, question, I see.
Yes, quick question.
Yes.
So for the income, if it's a disabled child, are they looking at the income of the parents, or is still the child?
Oh, for the
For
children?
the SSI, the
For
SSI.
SSI? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I think it's the parent income is what's taken into account. And
Thank
parent
you.
assets. Yeah.
Okay.
So for SSDI, in contrast, right? It's not about what you earn or how many assets you have. It's all about how long you've worked. Okay. And this is complicated. We're not going to go through all these details here, but it's both like how long you worked and did you work recently. Okay. And in general, it's like you have to have worked about half of the last 10 years, okay, for somebody who's older. Um, when they're younger, you just need to have worked, half of the possible years that you could have worked. So, for somebody who's 30, if they could have worked starting from age 22, then half of those years would be 4 years out of the 8 possible years you could have worked. Okay. But that's really the idea. And I think these rules are complicated they're complicated for me to understand. You can imagine how hard it is for people who want to apply for the benefits to understand whether they qualify or not. And so part of what happens when someone goes to a Social Security field office to apply is they help figure out whether they're insured for benefits. So if you meet these work duration and recency requirements, then we say you are insured for benefits. And that does borrow language from the health insurance sector, or the insurance sector more generally. And the way to think about these requirements, is it just means that the person has it's like making insurance premium payments through your FICA payroll tax. Okay. And it's just, you have to have paid enough in to be entitled to draw on your insurance if you need it. Okay, so that's kind of a way to think about it. It's like an insurance premium. They're making sure you've paid some premiums before you're eligible for the benefit. And if you haven't paid your premiums because you haven't worked enough, then SSI is the option for you. Okay, so that's age, that's the means tested versus work duration requirements, and then there's health. So for both programs, they have the exact same definition of disability. It is a health condition that prevents work, okay? And by health condition, they typically mean a medically diagnosed condition, okay? So that means the individual has had to be receiving medical care. There has to be a documented medical record that can be provided to SSA. If as I'm sort of explaining this, I'm sure many of you can imagine that for someone who doesn't have insurance, they might have difficulties accessing care. It can be hard to build the record of care that you need to demonstrate you have a medical impairment. Okay, so that's definitely an access issue for this program, in my view. The health condition has to prevent work for at least 12 months or will result in death within 12 months. Okay. And it does take a lot of time to get the benefit. The application process is lengthy. However, for people who have terminal illnesses and might not live for the next, for beyond a year, they have special processing that they do to try to handle those cases quickly so that the family can get some benefits before the person passes. Okay, so that's health. There's also an earnings requirement. And this is that earnings have to be below what is considered substantial gainful activity. it goes by the name SGA threshold, but basically it's saying that, all right, there's a substantial level of earnings. It's currently $1,550 per month. And anybody earning below that is not engaging in substantial work activity. Anybody above is, and that's their threshold. So they don't use a zero earnings cutoff. They use this $1,550 per month, which I think is something like $14,000 a year. When I say the full, one way I think about the SGA threshold over time is that it's roughly equivalent to a minimum wage job, a full-time 40 hours a week minimum wage job. Okay, it changes a little bit, and minimum wages are different in some states. But that's about like how to think about it. It is, however, if you go down to that Social Security field office to apply, you will be turned away and sent home if you are earning more than SGA. Okay, they will not take your application. I've written a bit about how I think that's a bit of a problem because, just because you apply for benefits doesn't mean you're going to get the benefits. Okay, like it's a 50-50 approval rate in the end. You're sort of like basically forced to sever any remaining employment ties you might have to apply. And then you kind of enter this system that, is, even though, you've made your insurance premium payments, you may not qualify for benefits under SSA's definitions. Okay, it's just the facts that it is a strict bar to receive benefits, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what the criteria are that are used for to determine if your health condition prevents work. Okay, how that gets operationalized. The last thing I'll say is that there are provisions for individuals receiving the benefits to try working again. And there are rules around, like, if your earnings exceed SGA, then they suspend your cash benefits and let you try working for a while. Benefits can be reinstated if you can't continue earning above SGA. And similarly, SSI has a benefit offset where your benefit is reduced by $1 for every $2 that you earn. Okay, and so this is designed to help people who can transition off the program in a gentle fashion, right? I actually would argue that the SSDI formula, and I'm going to show you this. Hopefully we'll have a little time to show you a little economics around this. It's not that gentle for SSDI, but for SSI, that benefit offset means that you can add work. Is everybody seeing my screen still?
Yes.
Yes.
Did nothing happened? Okay.
No,
I just had
so
a
good.
very weird experience where Teams opened and showed me myself presenting. So we're still in Zoom, near as I can tell. Okay, so those are the rules. How does SSA determine if an applicant's health condition prevents work? So there are several steps in this process. So I mentioned already that if you go down to the field office, the first thing they're going to check is, are you insured? Okay, that means have you contributed to the system enough? And we're talking primarily about SSDI right now. The next thing they're going to check is, are you currently earning? Okay, and if you are above it, if you have earnings above SGA, you have to go home. Okay, come back when you're not working. The next thing is going to be, well, do you have a condition that is simply like non-severe or not long-lasting? And so the classic example here is pregnancy. Okay, right, it's not going to last a year, and it's not considered a severe disability, even though the states finance maternity leave through short-term disability insurance programs. But anyway, that's an aside. And then the next thing will happen is they will check and see if your medical diagnoses are on their list. And the list is a list of very severe conditions that SSA considers automatically qualifying. It is a very complicated list. I have trouble reading it even. It's so long. There's so many parts to it. It would be very challenging, I think, for an individual to be able to figure out whether their condition meets the listings. It's really across any body system and domain, so it's understandably complicated. But it often, I say, well, there's the list. It makes it sound like you can just go like look it up on the list. It's harder than that, right? You need some specialized knowledge. Then the next question, suppose you don't have a medical condition on the list. Here's an example of something that's actually on the list would be Crohn's disease with complications. Okay, that's on the listings. And there might be some additional specifications for what they mean by complications, but that's an example. So if you have regular Crohn's disease and you don't have complications, then you're not on the list. And the next question will be, well, can you do any of the past jobs you've held? Okay, and I'm talking primarily about this step right here on the slide. And if you can do any work you've held in the past, then the idea is, yeah, you're not disabled, because there's some job you can do in the national economy, and we know you can do it because you've done it before. That, in other words, we know you can do it because we know you have the skills to do it. You may not have the functional capacity to do it. That's really what this question is asking. Do you have the functional capacity to do any of your past work? Because we know you qualify for that because you did it. Okay, so if the answer is no, then the next question, if the answer is yes, then you're done. You're not disabled. But if the answer is no, then they go on to this last step, which is sometimes called step 5, which says, can the applicant do any job in the national economy? That's the concept that's being used here. And it doesn't matter if that job is in your local labor market or not, okay? It's a broad conception of jobs that exist in reasonably prevalent numbers in the national economy. Now, to make that determination, SSA uses something called the medical vocational grid, and that's what we're looking at here. It works like this. Let's say you're sufficiently disabled that you could only do sedentary sitting jobs. You have limited education. Limited education is a high school non-graduate, okay? And you are skilled or semi-skilled in the sense that your skills aren't transferable to other occupations. Then it will all boil down to your age. Okay, if you are 49, you are not disabled. If you are 50, you're disabled. Okay, and that's how the grid largely works, is it basically provides these decision rules that I've given you a few examples here of how they split on age, and these create discontinuities in eligibility that people have tried to use in a regression discontinuity framework, in research. But the other thing to kind of just point out here is that you might notice that some of the terminology around age seems a little dated. For example, if you are 50 to 54, you are closely approaching advanced age. And this is really what this is just evidence of, is that the grid and the grid rules haven't been updated in a very, very long time. Okay. And there's been a lot of research policy talk around, what can we do with the grid? I've argued that the grid is just too blunt of an instrument. It really doesn't tell us much about an individual's work capacity, what jobs might be available to them in the economy. And that, maybe there are some other ways, other countries that do it differently. But nonetheless, this is how it works. It's turning out to be a bigger and bigger policy issue, and because the jobs that are sort of the reference jobs for unskilled jobs in the economy, unfortunately, also hasn't been updated in a very, very long time. It was based on the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, which was phased out in, I think, the 80s. And since then, SSA has been making attempts to create a new system that measures job requirements, but benefits are still being awarded on the basis of the old system. And this is just an article from less than 2 years ago, where the Washington Post, a reporter from the Washington Post, noted that the pneumatic tube operator is among the sedentary, unskilled jobs on a list the Social Security Administration uses when considering disability claims, even though the job barely exists in the modern economy. Okay. And so, this gives a list of other jobs here that are often offered up to people as the reason why their benefit application is denied. And these include things like, my favorite on here is the nut sorter. Egg processor, dowel pin inspector. It's just, like there's not a lot that, it's sort of this is the, I think the way to frame it is this is the system that this is where the system is at right now. And this is a big, is a big need for policy design and redesign in this area. SSA has been studying it and working on it for many years, but as far as like implementing a new way of doing this, that hasn't happened yet. And I'm seeing a question from Louisa, so the grid, so interesting, who would be responsible for moving towards getting that updated? Yeah, it's not clear to me how that happens. I think there's a fair bit that SSA can do themselves. And they have commissioned the Department of Labor to begin surveying employers to get updated information about occupations. Those data are now coming into existence. There've been some early waves and some later waves. They're trying to kind of, work out the kinks in those data. But there's an important tension between what SSA can do on its own and what Congress has to do. I'm not totally clear what could be accomplished here on this, Louisa, just to answer your question, by SSA alone. But it is a big problem, and something to really kind of, when thinking about how might we change the program, what needs to happen. And like, we at the RDRC, we are thinking about evidence-based policy reforms and, let's look at the program as it stands, and are there, how does it suit communities? How does it not serve communities? These are questions that a lot about understanding. So we're trying to build the evidence base for them on this. The other thing you might know about the SSDI program is that it was basically, accused, perhaps rightly, of, although I'm not so sure about that, the more I study it, of runaway growth over time. And this was the picture, basically so what I'm showing you is the number of SSDI beneficiaries in millions measured on the vertical axis. And then I'm showing it over time from 1960 through 2023. And so the program began in 1956. So this is the first data point we have in 1960. And you see that the program grew. I mean, it really doubled, tripled, quadrupled in these early years as eligibility was expanded. The program was initially aimed at older men. And so the modal person was like an older man with a blue collar job who had a cardiovascular event. Okay, that's kind of the original conception. And then over time, they expanded it to all ages. They included women, and there have been some changes in the medical criteria as well. There was concern about how fast the program was growing, and in the 1980s, some of you might remember, this was under the Reagan administration, there were some very high profile and tragic terminations of people with mental illness from the program. That prompted a big backlash that I think most people would argue really set the program on a course for growth over the next several decades. But here's like the thing that's so interesting is that the program caseload peaked in about 2012, 13, 14, right around here. And this coincides with the large baby boom cohort, both kind of moving out of the program eligibility range, right? They start moving out of SSDI, which ends at full retirement age, and then they move into the regular retirement program. But also there were some policy compliance initiatives in 2010 that were kind of internal policy changes that SSA made that we've been studying this, I and my collaborators, that we believe did play a role in this caseload decline. So you will often encounter literature that talks about the dramatic growth of the SSDI program, but that is no longer the case. So I can't, I often will referee papers on DI in journals, and I'm often saying, fix your framing. It's no longer a growing program. It is a shrinking program. Okay. And one way to understand what's happening here is by decomposing flows in and flows out. So here is the same blue curve that you were just looking at. This is just the caseload, number of beneficiaries. But we're just looking now from, instead of going all the way back to 1960, I'm starting in 2001. And then I'm showing you what the new award rate, new number of new awards is. We're measuring that on the right axis here, and you can see it's rising, and then it starts declining in 2010, and then has just continued to decline ever since. Whereas the number of exits has just risen. It's just continued to increase. It's kind of come down a little bit recently. This could be a little demographics, and also well, a little bit the demographic changes, I would say, is probably the bulk of what's happening here. But naturally, if you have more exits from a state than inflows into a state, the stock begins to decline. Okay. And so the point I only want to make here is it really is about the decline in the new awards that's driving this turnaround in many, to a large degree, let's just say. Okay. I also wanted to just show you how the program has changed in terms of who is getting benefits over time. And so here I'm decomposing, the enrollee composition in, those early years. Notice how big circulatory system is. This is the green bar here. And, this was by far the largest category, and circulatory system refers to cardiovascular impairments. Okay, so again, think men in their 50s with cardiovascular disease. The program really began changing around the 1980s, and this was during that backlash period when the rules were adjusted to make it easier for people with mental disorders and people with pain to have their claims approved. And you see a lot of growth in mental disorders. These are these are awards for mental disorders during this time, the orange bars, and also musculoskeletal. Okay, but notice as the program has shrunk, notice where the declines are coming from, right? Like circulatory really hasn't changed, but people with mental disorders are getting benefits far less now than they were. Okay, it's also a bit true for folks with musculoskeletal disorders. Okay, but I like to say when we think about policy changes to this program, it's folks with mental disorders who are on the margin of the policy change. Like, you want to know who's going to be affected if you adjust eligibility. Chances are it will be folks with severe mental diagnoses. Okay, that tends to be what we see, both like descriptively, but also econometrically. The SSI program, I'm gonna, just show you just 2 slides about that. It too has grown over the same period. You're looking at, I think you might even be looking at the same scale, maybe slightly different, slightly lower, but SSI has grown as well, and SSI also has started to flatten out and decline a bit over time. There is an important compositional difference between SSDI and SSI, and that is that among SSI awardees or beneficiaries, mental disorders are the bulk of the awards, 60%. And that too has grown over time. It used to be 42%, and now it's 60% fully. So that's another thing to kind of think about if you consider doing research on SSI. 60% of the SSI population will, or thereabouts, will have a mental impairment as the reason they qualified for benefits. And I think that does, it causes us to think a little bit more carefully and in more detail about what types of, suppose somebody in this population did want to try working, what type of work would they be able to do? What types of accommodations might they need from their workplace, et cetera. Okay. All right. We've talked a bit about many things about, regarding the program, but I just want to like give you kind of a very high level take on what really drives changes in these caseload trends. And my number one factor is disability policy. Okay, so the work we're doing studying this program is very important for informing that endeavor. By far, the program, rises and falls on the basis of the policies that are enacted. Demographic shifts are also really, really, really important. The population aging and the large baby boom cohort has absolutely shaped these trends as well. And the rise in female labor supply has also been incredibly important, right? So as women have entered the labor force over the last 30 years, say, in larger numbers, they've been paying into the system. They've been making their premium payments. And so they are now insured for benefits, and that's caused the program to grow. Mortality decline has also played a role. Number 3 on the list is labor market opportunities. The program does react to the labor market. There's a kind of a literature on this. I have contributed to this literature. When people with disabilities are laid off from jobs in an economic downturn, many of them flow into the DI program. And once they flow in, they're less likely to, people don't flow out as readily. Most people are in for the rest of their lives. So it is, in some ways, I'd like to say it's sort of acting like an unemployment program, except it's long-term, right? Not what it was meant for. And then, the fourth thing on this list you might be surprised to learn is health. And by that, I mean trends in health just haven't played as big a role as any of these other factors before it. And trends in health insurance have also, been a small, there's some, the Medicaid expansions we're finding may have had some effect on the program. But by and far, these are not the biggest factors shaping the program. I'm seeing, two questions. One about, is there any information on how the increase in autism diagnoses may be contributing to the growth in SSI? Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting research question that you could look at in SSI data. You could start by looking at there are these various statistical reports for the program that you can find online, and they often will break out diagnoses, and you might be able to start getting a sense of how that has shaped the program over time. And you're also kind of right to point out that that mental impairment category, the way SSA categorizes things, that's where it's going to show up. Okay, in that category. And then the COVID bump. Yeah, we just aren't seeing much of any reaction to COVID at all with this program. with either SSI or SSDI. If anything, people lost access to the program because the Social Security field offices were closed for 2 years. And, you know, for people who don't have internet access or don't feel comfortable using internet access or need the help from a field office person to help them put it together, you know, there's a number of reasons why we think that the program just hasn't really. I've got a slide that I often show that just shows applications have continued to decline. No, the program has continued to decline and applications have just been kind of flat through the whole COVID pandemic. Everybody was looking closely for, you know, a spike relating to COVID. Okay, so I'm thinking here about what to, like, you know, as usual, I talk too slow and like to kind of tell you all the
Just keep
history
in
and
mind,
background.
you've been
What's
taking
that?
some questions as you go, so you kind of,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. I wanted to just say a little bit about one economic framing for SSDI is that it is an example of a program with an insurance incentive trade-off. Okay, and the idea simply is that you want to provide, you know, DI benefits that insure people against, you know, a severe disability onset that, you know, limits their ability to support themselves in a labor market. You know, but you don't want everybody to take up those benefits because then you'd have no workers, right? So you have to have some rules and regulations around who's eligible. Okay. And so in a way, people have argued there's an incentive to drop out of the labor market and just apply for SSDI because, you know, hey, it might be a relatively generous benefit compared to your minimum wage job that, by the way, doesn't have health insurance. This does have health insurance, right? And so there's just the tenor of the economics literature is often about this, you know, this insurance incentive trade-off, whether there is or isn't moral hazard and how big is it. Okay, moral hazard is an economic concept that comes straight from these insurance incentive trade-off, these models. And it, you know, it has at its core, the reason the moral hazard and that there is a trade-off here is that we can't perfectly observe. SSA cannot perfectly observe whether someone has a disability that meets their criteria, right? Like think of a mental diagnosis. There's no like, you know, I can't like, you know, use a thermometer up to my head that gives a score for whether I have a mental health diagnosis or not, right? That doesn't work. So we just, you know, a lot of the conditions that people suffer from in our, you know, in modern lives aren't measurable the way someone could measure your cardiovascular disease in the old days, right? So there's been this shift to conditions such as mental impairments, as I showed you, as musculoskeletal conditions, where there, you know, for those, there could be a lot of pain. We don't have a way of measuring pain in an objective sense, right? So that's where it comes down to. We can't perfectly observe whether someone's disabled. And, you know, the employer side of things also doesn't get enough attention in the literature owing to data issues. But, you know, employers have a duty under the law to provide reasonable accommodations to workers who experience disabilities. But there too, they have private information about the true costs of accommodating somebody that, you know, we just will never really know. So that's where, you know, you wind up with a situation where you could have some people who on the program who, you know, truly don't meet the criteria. And you might have some people who truly meet the criteria, but they're not on the program, right? And so there is a research efforts underway to try to estimate how big is that, you know, how big are those groups, right? And you might be thinking those sound like type 1 and type 2 errors in statistics, and they're absolutely analogous to that. But that's the trade-off here, is how do you find the right benefit level and the right, you know, the right rules that don't impose too much burden on folks, but, you know, ensure that people who can work and people who can't work get the support they need. Okay, that's the bottom line there. I have largely told you about that. I want to say just a couple of things about the program that I think will interest you, given what I know about your research areas so far. But the research on SSDI has largely focused on moral hazard and fiscal costs, like how many people are getting benefits who really actually could work. And I've contributed to this literature. I have something new to say about that, but there has been much less research on what the benefits of the program are, okay? And as economists, we care about welfare and like the value that people get from programs. There are metrics for measuring the value of public programs. One of them is the marginal value of public funds that you might be familiar with. DI has a number that is under 1, meaning that people don't value it as much as it costs us to provide it. I think that number is incomplete and doesn't capture all the value that new research from RDRC researchers is producing. Manasi Deshpande is a primary contributor to this literature, but this picture on the right just shows the effects of getting the DI benefit on bankruptcy, the chances you experience bankruptcy, 31% reduction in the chances of bankruptcy, 32% reduction in the chances of foreclosure, 10% reduction in chances of eviction, 21% of having your home sale for a home sale purchased, 21% reduction, 19% increase in the ability to purchase a home. Okay, this is a really, really big deal. It's hard to overstate how important this program is for people. And I think that's all I'm going to say about that. And I think I'm going to skip my budget constraints. I was thinking you guys of all the audience would appreciate them, but I think I want to kind of move on to something else, which is who's getting access to this program? Like, what do we know about that? So you can go look at my slides, and I'm happy to talk through my beloved budget constraints. It's hard to take the economics fully out because it's just so interesting. But I want to this is a picture that we tabulated from SSA's administrative data, and we're showing employment before and after somebody gets SSDI. And this is like the canonical classic comparison in the literature for estimating the quote work disincentive effect or moral hazard effect of SSDI. And this is from a paper I wrote. But this is just data. There's no estimation here. And what you see here is that, about 5 years before, like, people are doing great 5 years, before they apply for DI. So DI is time 0 here, and we're going back in time 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. I'll just focus on the green curve for a moment, and you can see that employment rates are peak at around 90%, a little bit more. But then people start experiencing illness or injury, and their employment rate starts falling. And then eventually, when they can't sustain work any longer, they apply for benefits. Okay, and you're seeing 40% here because these are annual data and people can apply throughout the year. Okay, and it never totally goes down to 0 employment, because remember, people just have to have earnings below SGA. So you can have a little bit of earnings and be fine. But you see how the earnings really fall, and then or employment falls and it never recovers, right? People receiving benefits, once they start getting the benefits, only about 10% of them are working 4 years after they get their decision. And they're, to be on the program, they're not working above SGA by and large, right? This is just a little bit of work. In contrast, the people who are denied benefits, they never had as much work attachment as the folks who are allowed, because the red line is below the green line. But they too experience disability and eventually apply, just like the people who eventually get benefits. But when they get denied, they have to go back to work, right? Remember, only 50% of folks are going to get this benefit. It's like a lottery. So you got to go back to work, and we see employment rates that are at about 50% for this group. So even this group never really recovers its 80% from before their disability. There has been a disability loss here, but this kind of underscores both, like, how strict SSDI's decision is. And the literature, the thrust of a long economics literature has been to say, well, this red curve is the counterfactual employment rate of the people who are awarded benefits. So had they not been awarded the benefits, and if they were identical, then we would expect 50% of them to be working. And now, everybody pointed out, well, hey, wait a second, there are other differences, like the severity of your impairment. For example, right? If you're denied, your impairment isn't severe. You're gonna, so there's been a lot of arguing about whether this is an upper bound or a lower bound. And we did estimates using the so-called judge design or examiner design, instrumental variables design, where you use deviations across examiners in the same office in the allowance rate or award approval rate of applicants. And what we found is that people reduce earnings by about $4,000 when they get DI, which, isn't much. Meaning the moral hazard effect may not be that big. They reduce employment by about 28 percentage points. That sounds big, but I think we have to take it in context with the magnitude of the earnings loss. And in newer work that was also RDRC work a few years ago that we're still working on, because we're very slow. This is with Hilary Hoynes and at UC Berkeley and Alexander Strand at SSA. We were actually able to estimate the counterfactual earnings of people who are denied. And what this tells us is, like, if these people had not gotten benefits down here, the people who are allowed, and people who are on the margin of the program, just right around the eligibility margin, how much would they have worked? Well, the answer is about $4,000 a year is what they would have earned. Now, remember that SGA threshold? The SGA threshold is like, $13,000, $14,000 a year. So what we're arguing here is that it looks like the program is too strict right now, because the people the people right on the margin that it's allowing and denying are their earnings capacity is only $4,000. That means, like, the folks with $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, all the way up to SGA, still don't, still might qualify, I guess is kind of what we're trying to say. And I'm not trying to sort of second guess the decisions, but it does look like as the program has evolved over time, it has become stricter. And I did mention early on there were some policy changes that really shifted the fraction of people denied from like 16% to 30%, shifted the fraction on the eligibility margin. It narrowed it from 52% in 2008 to 46%, and reduced the fraction that is allowed by a lot. Okay, so the program has gotten harder to, and the allowance, here's just a picture of this gray curve is the allowance rate, which at one point in 2008 was like almost 70% and is now 45%. Okay, and this is the allowance rate at the appellate level, which is, there are two levels that I didn't talk to you too much about. But anyway, that's basically what I wanted to convey to you about the program itself. And I'm gonna, maybe I'll just kind of stop on a slide here that has sort of a very incomplete listing of some topics that are on the research frontier, so to speak. Again, this is just some things that I find kind of interesting. That I've got a bunch of additional slides about each of these as just like fodder that are in the slide deck, which I believe we'll make available to folks. But, just to point out a few things, I kind of explained to you that I don't think we know the full extent of the value people get from this benefit. And I've also told you that the program is denying a lot more people than it used to, and it's become very strict. It looks to us like it's operating way below the SGA target now. And it's just getting smaller and smaller and smaller because people aren't qualifying anymore as much. The how employers behave and treat people with disabilities, we know almost nothing about that. There's a new NBER paper about that I've put in here. Disability health equity and its intersections with racial equity is a huge area that almost no one has done work on. And I'll just make a pitch for some data we have at the NBER, which is the SSA's own data don't have a lot of information about race in them, but we have been buying Medicaid data, which does have information about race in it, as a way to investigate health and health outcomes among SSI recipients in data. So the way to think about those data is we basically have the universe of SSI recipients in the Medicaid data, and there, you know a lot about their health, and about their it's largely you have to look at questions of health because it's Medicaid data, I think, is the way to explain it. Maybe if I can just take, I don't know, do we have a list of questions that have been sent to me that I should look at really quickly?
I think there's one in chat, right? That's pending, Gretchen.
Or just the chat? Because I think I've dealt with the chat. What's that?
Sorry, it's one question left from Louisa. She was asking about how much of the application can be completed online by yourself and how much has to be done on site, and if it is online and mobile friendly.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would love to know more about that myself. My understanding is it's supposed to be possible to submit it online, but there's also a telephone line, and I don't understand how the telephone line interacts with the online. Like, so can you call up and somebody will input it into the system while you're on the phone with them, or is it just support and help? So I would say, Louisa, that's an excellent question, and not an area I know much about. And it feels like, to understand it, like we need to like we got to get to a field office and ask some questions about how things work.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that could be an area of research, right? To really
For sure.
meet all barriers,
Yeah.
opportunities.
Exactly. Yeah. I think this is like just a slide with a little more detail on the disability health equity topic. And I just wanted to point out that people with disabilities as a demographic group have just become an NIH designated health equity population in 2023. So I think we're just going to begin seeing an explosion of work in this area, because now they'll, like research on these topics of disability disparities, whether intersectional or not, like, so, disparities in outcomes for people with disabilities versus not people without disabilities, right? There are all kinds of intersectional questions around that that I think are probably, that really need to get looked at. But I think it's just like your interest in this area is, I think, at a tremendous time, because we will begin seeing better data. I just came from a conference about, what new data do we need to really, and it was sponsored by NIH. What do we need to push this forward? Okay, what other questions do we have? We are at time. I can stay for a few minutes. I know you all have to run along and drop off, but I'm happy to stay for a few minutes and answer questions. Anybody? I release everybody who at 3 o'clock, but I will stay on.
Hi, could I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Could you please expand on the Medicaid data that is available through the NBER, specifically the time period number of states that you currently have and who can access the data?
Yes.
Thanks.
So, okay, all states, we have TAF data, which began in, oh shoot, is TAF 2010? Does anybody know? Or is it later? I'm blanking on the exact start date of TAF. Maybe it was a little bit later. I think TAF came online in 2016. So TAF is called TMSIS analytic file, TAF data for short. It was a new organization of the data that superseded the old form of the data, which was called MAX. So we started buying TAF data when it first started in, I think, 2016. And we have been buying it every year. And we have bought all states, all files, and all people in Medicaid in the data at the NBER. We bought it. So SSA funded the purchase of the data, and we bought it for RDRC projects. So the requirement is you need an RDRC project. But if you have an RDRC approved project, then you have to go through a DUA process to get permission from CMS to use the data, and it's all of that is managed by the NBER. But that is possible. We the TAF data are complicated for anybody who hasn't worked regularly with Medicare, Medicaid, healthcare claims. It's hard data because there aren't a lot of code books. It's hard to know what you're looking at. So we have another initiative to create to study health disparities in the SSI population with these data, but by creating kind of summary files where we pull out health outcomes at an aggregated level for people with disabilities, people without disabilities, and split by racial groups. And those data, the idea behind those data is that they will be used in the training programs that we are running. We've launched for students at Howard who maybe are in the master's level. And so Jabay Grooms is the lead of the Howard piece. And there's another arm of the program at Hunter College in New York. Jessica Van Paris is leading that. And so like in the background, we've been trying to like figure out how can we make it simpler for people to use these data in aggregated form, but to study questions that relate to disparities in health outcomes for people with disabilities. Does that answer the question? I went on for a long time.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Anything else?
Thank you so much. That was a good presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Please fill out our rating form. I think we'll send it around and ask for your feedback.
Okay.
But we do appreciate everybody taking time out of your day to learn a little bit about my favorite topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you.
Is it okay to email
Yeah,
you if we have questions? Is it okay to email you questions?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh,
Please do.
Thank you
Yes.
very much. Okay, you have a good day.
I'd like to remind everyone that the recording will be available on the RDRC's website under resources and something. Sorry, I don't have it open. So, but it will be available. The recording from last time is there as well.
Great. Okay.